The night Amara came into the world was unlike any other remembered in the long history of the village. The elders still said that the air itself had felt heavy, as though the sky had pressed down upon the earth, and that even the animals had grown restless hours before the first screams of labor carried across the fields. The moon, which should have shone full and silver, dimmed suddenly under a shadow, though no one had predicted an eclipse. It was not the slow swallowing of light they had seen in their lifetimes but a swift, unnatural darkening that seemed to come from nowhere, plunging the land into an eerie half-night. At the same time the clouds rolled in from all directions, low and heavy as if gathering to watch. The wind rose and died in sharp, strange bursts, carrying whispers no one could understand. Then came the rain, not a soft drizzle nor a furious downpour, but a rhythm of falling water that pulsed in time with the low growl of thunder. Inside a small humble hut near the western edge of the village, Amara's mother gripped the edge of her straw mat, her body bending with the waves of pain that had begun hours earlier. Her midwife worked with trembling hands. It wasn't the first child she had delivered, but this night's strange signs had already frayed her nerves. She kept glancing at the small, open window, where shadows danced unnaturally against the mud walls. The air smelled faintly of iron and wet earth, as though the storm had pulled something ancient from deep in the ground. Amara's father paced outside, his tunic soaked from the rain, his ears catching every sound from within. He did not notice the way the neighbors had begun to gather, whispering among themselves about the moon's disappearance and the strange thunder that did not roll but throbbed like a heartbeat. When the first cry of the child split the air, a gust of wind slammed through the hut, snuffing out the small oil lamp. For a moment, there was complete darkness, no moon, no flame, only the sound of the newborn's voice rising and falling in strange, uneven pitches. Some would later swear the cry carried an echo, as if another voice had been born alongside hers. The midwife relit the lamp with shaking hands, and in its flickering light, they saw the child. She was small but fierce-eyed, with a strange birthmark curling like a crescent moon over her left shoulder. Her skin was slick with the storm's humidity, and her tiny fingers flexed and clenched with unusual strength. The midwife's breath caught, but she said nothing, not yet. Outside, the neighbors began to murmur more boldly. They remembered stories from their grandparents' time, stories of children born under unnatural skies, children who grew to bring misfortune to all around them. It was said the spirits marked such births to warn the living, to set them apart as a curse or a test. The moon's sudden disappearance, the rain's unnatural rhythm, the thunder's heartbeat, these to the gathered eyes were signs too heavy to ignore. When the father emerged to announce the birth of his daughter, he was met not with congratulations but with uneasy silence and eyes that shifted away from his. In the days that followed, the storms did not entirely leave. The sky seemed to brood above the village, its colors too deep at sunset, its clouds too low at dawn. The river swelled despite the rains being light, and 2 goats in the northern pasture sickened for no reason anyone could name. Each small misfortune was tied in whispered tones to the newborn girl in the hut. Children were told not to wander near her home. Some of the older women crossed themselves when they passed her mother in the market. Even those who said nothing found themselves glancing over their shoulders after hearing the child's unusual coos, which sometimes rose in a pattern almost like speech. Amara's mother, exhausted but fiercely protective, began to feel the weight of the village's gaze. She noticed how friends she had shared bread with now hesitated to visit, how the midwife kept her eyes on the ground when she came to check on the baby's health. Her husband tried to shrug it off, telling her that people feared what they did not understand, but she could hear the unease in his own voice at night when the wind would push against their door, making it creak like something trying to get in. Once, she woke to find him standing in the doorway, looking out at the sky where the moon hung dim behind thin clouds, his face pale and unreadable. Weeks passed and the child grew stronger. Her cries were not frequent, but when they came, they seemed to still the air, as though even the insects paused to listen. She had a way of staring into a person's face without blinking, her dark eyes wide and unafraid, which unsettled even the bravest of men. Once, when her mother held her outside in the sunlight, a sudden gust of wind curled around them, carrying the scent of rain though the sky was clear. A woman passing by clutched her own child to her chest and hurried away, muttering about omens. By the time Amara could crawl, the stories had already taken root in the village. The night of her birth had become more than memory, it had grown into a tale told by firelight, each retelling sharpening the details. Some claimed the wind had whispered her name before she was even born. Others insisted the shadow over the moon had taken the shape of a hand, as though reaching down for her. And the birthmark on her shoulder, so simple to her parents' eyes, became in the minds of others a sigil, the mark of a spirit's claim. Every unlucky hunt, every sudden illness, every argument that split friends was, in some corner of someone's mind, tied to the girl born on that storm-eclipsed night. Yet within her home she was loved. Her mother sang to her, rocking her in the woven cradle by the window. Her father carved her small toys from softwood, painting them in bright colors to make her laugh. They shielded her as best they could from the stares, the muttered words, the slow pulling away of a community they had once trusted. But even they could not escape the quiet, creeping thought that the night of her birth had not been ordinary, that the storms and the shadowed moon had meant something. Whether that meaning was a curse, a blessing, or something far stranger they could not yet say. All they knew was that the child they held in their arms carried a presence that was too large for the hut, too strange for the village, and perhaps too powerful for the world to ignore. And beyond the village, deep in the hills where the old trees grew and the wind always carried the scent of rain, something else had taken notice. The days in Amara's life unfolded like the same pages of a book that no one wanted to read, yet could never put down. The small village she called home existed in a rhythm of seasons, harvests, and rituals, yet she seemed always outside of that rhythm, an offbeat note in a perfect melody. From the moment she could walk, she noticed how people's gazes slid past her, how their conversations lowered into hisses and mutters when she approached. It was as though an invisible wall had been built around her, a barrier made not of stone or wood, but of fear, suspicion, and old superstitions. As a little girl, she often lingered on the edge of the village square, watching other children play with makeshift balls, sticks, and woven dolls. Their laughter was wild and free, yet when her small feet padded toward them, the games faltered. One or two would stop mid-laugh and tug the others away, leaving her alone with only the dust rising from the trampled ground. Once she tried to join a game of rolling hoops, but the boy nearest her grabbed his hoop so quickly he knocked it over. "Don't touch it," he hissed to his friend, eyes darting to her as though she had already infected the wooden toy with some unseen poison. Her mother had tried to shield her at first, wrapping her in warmth, telling her bedtime stories about brave girls who changed the fates written for them. But even her mother could not shield her from the way the village women looked at them in the market, whispering as they exchanged maize, herbs, or fabric. One woman, forgetting to keep her voice low, had said once, "That's the one, born under the split moon and blackened sun. She carries the mark." Amara hadn't known exactly what mark they meant, but she understood the sharp sting in her chest when her mother's hands tightened protectively around hers. The years blurred, and so did the walls between solitude and silence. Amara became skilled at moving through the village without disturbing anyone. She learned to gather water from the river at the quietest hours, when the morning mist still hovered low and the air carried the chill of the night. She knew the paths to the forest that no one else took, where she could collect wild berries and mushrooms without hearing whispers at her back. The forest became her sanctuary, a place where she wasn't a shadow or a warning, but simply a girl who could climb trees, run her fingers along moss, and listen to the secret murmurs of leaves swaying in the wind. Still, she couldn't escape entirely. There were moments when the cruelty of others cut too deeply to ignore. During a festival, when bright fabrics fluttered and drums filled the air with pulsing rhythms, Amara had walked past a group of women pounding cassava. One spat on the ground as she passed, muttering, "A curse walks here." The words were like cold rain down her spine. Once, a boy threw a pebble at her back and shouted, "Stormbringer," while his friends laughed. She didn't cry in front of them. She had learned that tears were a gift they didn't deserve to see, but she felt the bruise both on her skin and in her chest long after the stone had fallen to the dirt. Her mother was her only constant, the steady anchor in a sea of shifting tides. In the evenings, as they sat by the small fire outside their hut, her mother would braid Amara's hair with slow, careful fingers and hum songs from her own childhood. "You are not the curse they think you are," she would whisper, "you are my blessing." And though Amara wanted to believe it, the truth was tangled in the years of loneliness that had shaped her. The seasons marked her growth. When she was 12, she was taller, quieter, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of someone much older. Her hands were strong from work, fetching water, tending small garden patches, weaving mats from palm fronds. These skills made her useful but not welcome. Even when her work helped the village indirectly, no one thanked her. They accepted the benefits as though they were owed, without acknowledging the giver. Yet, in her own way, she began to cultivate resilience. She learned to listen more than she spoke, to observe the small movements of people's faces, to recognize kindness in its rare and fleeting forms. A smile from an old woman who sold clay pots, a nod from a hunter who once let her pass without a word when they crossed paths in the forest. These moments were like sparks in the dark, small yet powerful enough to keep her from sinking completely into bitterness. At night, when she lay on her woven mat, she often wondered about the storm-filled night of her birth, the howling winds, the red lightning, the eerie darkness that swallowed the moon. She didn't remember it, of course, but she had heard enough fragments of whispered stories to piece together a picture. The elders claimed it was a night of bad omens, a time when the sky spoke in warnings. She sometimes thought that if she could stand under such a sky now, as an older and stronger Amara, she might be able to understand what the storm had been trying to say. Her life remained one of isolation, but she had begun to notice something new inside herself, an invisible thread of strength, woven from every insult she endured without breaking, every lonely day she filled with her own purpose. The village could label her as they wished, but she was beginning to realize that their words didn't have to shape her entirely. The forest knew her, the river accepted her reflection, and the wind sometimes seemed to carry her name like a secret it wanted to keep. This quiet resilience didn't erase her loneliness, but it gave her a foundation. And though she didn't yet know it, the girl who had been shunned and whispered about was slowly becoming someone the world would one day have to reckon with. For now, she remained the shadow on the edge of the crowd, the figure who moved silently through the early mist, the one they called a curse but who carried within her a strength even she had yet to understand. It began with a single lamb. Amara had been walking along the edge of the grazing fields at dusk, the sky bruised with the last strokes of sunset, when the little creature collapsed in the grass. It was the runt of the flock, one the shepherds had nursed carefully through the cold season. Amara had bent down, her fingers brushing its wool, and felt the tiny body twitch once, twice, and then still. She'd been the only one there. When the shepherd found her kneeling beside it moments later, her wide eyes reflecting the last light of day, he froze. His gaze darted between her and the lamb, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any words. By the next morning, the whole village knew. They didn't speak of it directly to her face, but whispers rode the wind wherever she went. "She touched it," someone said under their breath at the well. "Did you see? It died right after." That might have been forgotten, chalked up to misfortune, had it not been for what happened a week later. A patch of the maize field, lush and green just days before, turned brittle and yellow overnight. Farmers, their feet sinking into the dry dust, found Amara sitting by the edge of the plot, plaiting strands of grass into a little ring. She said she liked how the grass felt between her fingers. They didn't ask her anything then, but by evening her name was spoken again, this time over low fires in the privacy of kitchens. Some said she had the touch of blight, others claimed the land itself was rejecting her. It didn't matter that she'd done nothing but sit there. In the minds of those who already feared her, the evidence was stacking like stones. Her adoptive mother, Lami, tried to shield her from the murmurs. "The land dries because of heat," she told her firmly one night, ladling stew into a wooden bowl. "Lambs die when they are weak. You are not the cause." But Amara had begun to notice the way Lami's hands trembled when she spoke, the way her eyes darted to the window, as though she half expected to find someone eavesdropping. Even the comfort of those words could not blot out the looks she caught when she walked through the market. Sideways glances, quick crossings of arms, the way some mothers tugged their children closer when she passed. The third event came during the rainy season. A sudden storm ripped through the village, and in its wake, a great tree by the river split down its trunk. The elders called it an omen of imbalance. As the men tried to pull it apart and salvage the wood, someone noticed Amara standing barefoot in the mud a few yards away, her face tilted toward the clouds. She liked storms, they felt alive in a way she could never explain. But the moment the elders saw her there, motionless, staring at the shattered tree, their expressions hardened. "She was here again," one of them muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Where she walks, trouble follows." By now, Amara had learned the rhythm of suspicion. First came the event, something sudden, strange, or unfortunate. Then came the noticing, that moment someone spotted her nearby, whether by chance or choice. Finally came the connection, woven out of fear, superstition, and the memory of her birth under storms and eclipses. The facts never mattered. Once her name slipped into the conversation, it stayed there, lingering like a shadow no wind could disperse. There were moments she questioned herself. Alone in her small sleeping space, listening to the rain on the roof, she would replay the events in her mind. Had she lingered too long by the maize field? Had she looked too intently at the tree before it split? Did her touch somehow carry something unseen? The thought frightened her, yet she refused to accept it entirely. She still remembered the warmth of her adoptive mother's hands, the rare but genuine smiles from the healer's son who sometimes brought her herbs, the gentle way the river sounded when she sat by its edge. Not everything died around her. Still, the string of incidents tightened the village's fear into something sharper. One afternoon, a woman's clay pot shattered as she was carrying it home from the river. The woman swore she'd seen Amara standing on the far path, watching her. The shards were still wet when she told the story to a neighbor, and by nightfall half the village had heard some version of it, each retelling adding its own layer, until someone claimed Amara had been seen smiling when it happened. The elders began holding quiet gatherings to discuss her. Lami overheard fragments when she went to trade at the market. What if it grows worse? She was born under a curse. These things will not stop. We have to think of the safety of the children. They hadn't confronted Amara yet, but their avoidance was growing. Children who used to play nearby now found excuses to leave. The shepherd who once gave her wool scraps now crossed to the other side of the path when he saw her coming. Then came the incident with the water jars. The central well was the heart of the village and everyone drew from it daily. One morning the water was found cloudy, tinged with an odd metallic taste. People murmured about poison springs, about foul spirits lurking below the surface. No one mentioned Amara's name immediately, but it didn't take long before someone remembered she'd been seen fetching water the evening before. That single recollection was enough. By midday, people were filling their jars from a stream farther away rather than risk sharing from the same source she had touched. The unspoken rules became clear. If something broke, spoiled, or failed, it was safer to assume Amara's presence had played a role. This thinking seeped into daily life so deeply that even those who liked her began to keep their distance, not wanting to be pulled into her shadow. Amara bore it silently. She did not cry in public, nor did she plead her innocence. That would have been useless. Instead, she withdrew further into herself, speaking less, watching more. If they saw her as a curse, she thought bitterly, then perhaps it was better not to fight the image too hard. But inside something was shifting. With every accusation, a strange mixture of sorrow and defiance began to take root. She did not know yet if there was any truth to the whispers, if perhaps some hidden thread tied her to the misfortunes around her. But she began to sense that, curse or not, she had a place in the patterns unfolding. Storms still drew her in. The river still seemed to hum when she sat beside it, as though it recognized her. And sometimes, when she walked through the fields at dusk, she thought she felt the wind bend slightly toward her, carrying with it the faintest echo of a voice she could not yet understand. If the village thought they were only tightening a noose around her life, they did not see what was quietly forming in the spaces between. An awareness, an unspoken bond with forces they could neither name nor control. The first signs of the curse, as they called it, were only the beginning. That night, the village lay wrapped in silence, the kind that pressed against the skin like a warning. Amara sat by the small fire in her hut, tracing circles in the dirt with a stick, her mind replaying the humiliations of the cleansing festival. She could still smell the acrid smoke from the herbs they'd burned, still feel the oily residue of the holy water dripping down her hair. Her shoulders ached from the tight grip of the elders as they had pushed her to kneel, and her ears still rang with the chanting that had sought to erase her existence. The fire popped, throwing a brief spray of sparks, and for a heartbeat the shadows on the walls shifted unnaturally, bending and twisting as if alive. She froze. The wind outside was still, but the flicker in the flames seemed deliberate. She leaned closer, her breath shallow. That was when she heard it, a voice low and strange like the rustling of dry leaves mixed with the echo of distant thunder. Amara? Her hand tightened on the stick until it snapped. She turned sharply, scanning the corners of the hut. No one was there. The shadows on the far wall seemed to ripple, and slowly, as if pushed through the fabric of the night itself, a figure stepped forward. It was neither fully human nor fully spirit. Its skin was a shifting canvas of storm clouds, its eyes a deep, glowing gold. Where it moved, the air thickened with a strange pressure, making her heartbeat echo in her own ears. She backed away instinctively, but the figure raised a hand. Long fingers tipped in something like light, something like claws, and the air between them grew calm. Do not run. I have been with you since the beginning, it said. Her lips trembled. What are you? Its head tilted, studying her as if she were the one who had appeared in its home. They call me a curse. That is not untrue. But you carry me and I carry you. You are my vessel, my voice, my chosen. Amara shook her head violently. No. You're the reason they hate me. The reason they spit when I pass. The reason you are alive, it interrupted, its tone cutting through her words like a blade. The storms that marked your birth, the eclipse that crowned your head, those were my gifts. I shielded you when the fever took half the village. I silenced the snake that crawled toward your cradle. And yes, I let the crops wither and the livestock fall, for their mouths spoke too much poison. Asterisk. Her knees weakened and she sank onto the floor mat, torn between terror and something else. Something unspoken, an old ache for someone to claim her, even if it was a thing made of shadow. Why come to me now? She whispered. The figure's form shifted, its storm skin growing darker. Asterisk, because they will not stop until you are broken. The elders prepare something far worse than their festivals. I will not watch you die. It is time you chose whether to deny me, or to wield me. Asterisk. She swallowed hard. Wield you? What does that even mean? The figure knelt, lowering its golden eyes to hers. The air around them pulsed like the beat of a great drum. Asterisk. It means I will no longer whisper from the corners of your life. I will stand beside you in the open. They will see my face in yours. My power will be your own. But you must invite me. You must claim me. Asterisk. Her breath caught. The warmth of the fire suddenly felt too close, the shadows too deep. She thought of the endless years of isolation, the pitying glances, the sharp stones thrown by children. She thought of the way her name was always followed by a hiss. Her fingers dug into the mat. And if I refuse? The figure's eyes dimmed slightly. Asterisk. Then I will fade and you will face them alone. And they will win. Asterisk. For a long time neither spoke. The fire's light trembled, painting their faces, one flesh, one storm, in a fragile dance. Finally the being extended its hand. Asterisk. Choose Amara. Asterisk. Her own hand hovered in the air, shaking. Somewhere deep in her chest, something stirred, something that had been waiting all her life for this moment. The fire went out. And in the darkness, her fingers closed around the storm. The night after the strange being's appearance, Amara could not sleep. Every creak of her small hut seemed to echo with the weight of what she had heard. Her breath felt heavy in her chest, not from fear, but from the deep, unsettling ache of something she didn't understand. She had lived her entire life under the weight of the word curse, but never had she thought it could have a voice, let alone one that spoke to her with longing instead of malice. The wind outside carried the scent of rain though the skies were clear, a reminder of the strange, unexplainable nature of her existence. When the air in the room shifted again, she knew it had returned. It wasn't a sound that alerted her, nor a shadow, just a change in the stillness, as though the air bent toward something that wasn't supposed to exist. Slowly she turned her head. There it was again, the shimmering half-formed figure with eyes that looked older than the mountains. This time it seemed weaker, its form trembling as though even holding its shape was agony. You came back, Amara whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. I had to, it replied, the words carrying an echo that seemed to come from both near and far. I have waited lifetimes for you to be born. You are the only one who can hear me. The only one who can carry me, and set me free. Amara's brows knit together. Set you free? You've haunted me since the day I was born. You made them fear me. Why should I do anything for you? The being's gaze lowered and for the first time it looked ashamed. Because I am not what they think I am. I am bound to you not by choice but by an ancient mistake. Long ago I was human, full of greed, pride and cruelty. My soul was twisted, my name erased, and I was condemned to wander without peace. Each generation I am tied to a child, feeding on their misfortune. But with you, it is different. Different how? She asked warily. You are strong, the being said simply. You have endured their hatred without becoming like them. You have not let bitterness consume you, and because of that I can feel the chains breaking. But I cannot cross into rest alone. I need to be reborn, not as a curse but as a life. My last chance is to come into this world as your child. The words hit her like a stone dropped into a still pond. Her child? The thought was absurd, impossible and terrifying all at once. And what would that mean for me? For the village? Do you know what they would do if they even suspected? They will never know, the being interrupted, its voice urgent now. When the time comes they will only see you as a mother. And through your blood I will come into this world cleansed of what I was. I will no longer bring death to the fields or sickness to the cattle. I will be nothing more than a child, an innocent one. Amara felt her throat tighten. She had never considered motherhood. She had barely been allowed to speak freely with others, let alone dream of a family. And yet, there was something in the way the being spoke, a quiet desperation that felt far too human for something that called itself a curse. Why me? She finally asked. Why not wait for someone else? I have, the being said, its voice heavy with centuries. but none could bear me without being destroyed. You hold me without even knowing it. You have carried me all these years, through every whisper, every cruel glance, every moment of loneliness, and yet you are still here. Still whole. I am asking you, Amara, to finish what began the night you were born. She stared at it, her mind spinning with questions she didn't know how to ask. There was no denying that something deep inside her, a place she had never dared to touch, was stirring. Was it compassion? Or something darker? What if I say no? She asked quietly. The being's form flickered, its light dimming. Then I will remain bound to you until the day you die. And when you pass, I will move to another. Perhaps a child of the village you care for, perhaps an innocent who will not endure as you have. The chain will never end. The silence between them was thick. The night air felt colder now, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. Amara turned her face toward the window where the moon hung pale and watchful. She didn't know if she was ready to give the answer it wanted. She didn't know if she could. But she did know one thing: something had shifted. She was no longer just the cursed girl the village had feared. She was the keeper of a choice that could change the fate of something ancient and broken. And for the first time, the weight of her life felt like more than just a burden. It felt like a key. The being's voice softened. Think of it not as giving me life, but as ending a shadow that has stretched too long. You have the power to turn a curse into a blessing. Amara closed her eyes, and the image of a child, one untouched by fear or suspicion, flickered in her mind. She didn't know if that was hope or the curse planting its seed. Either way, she could not unsee it. When she opened her eyes again, the being was fading into the darkness. I will return for your answer, it said, its voice almost tender. And I pray it will be yes. Alone once more, Amara sat in the quiet, her heart thudding in her chest. Somewhere deep inside her, she already knew this was not a decision she could escape. Under the pale wash of morning light, the news spread through the village like wildfire on dry grass. At first, it was only a whisper, an overheard fragment from the old herbalist's hut, where Amara had gone to fetch medicine for her aching hands. But by midday the whisper had grown teeth. It prowled through every alley, market stall, and courtyard, until it became the roar of a storm. They said she had been visited. They said the very curse that had haunted the village since the night of her birth had taken shape and spoken to her. They said it wanted to be born again through her. Mothers clutched their children closer as she walked by. Men stopped talking mid-sentence when she came into view, their faces taut with fear and something darker, hatred that had been simmering for years. Amara kept her head down, but the air itself seemed to hiss against her skin. By the time the elders summoned her to the council hut, the whole village had gathered outside. The crowd swelled like a living wall, pressing in with the weight of decades of suspicion. Some threw handfuls of dirt at her feet as she passed. Others spat, muttering prayers under their breath as though her shadow might cling to them if they were not careful. Inside the hut, the air was thick with incense and judgment. The elders sat in a semicircle, their eyes sharp and cold. Elder Masika, whose voice had once been like a second mother's to Amara when she was small, now spoke with a venom she had never known. Is it true? Masika's words were flat, but beneath them burned accusation. You spoke with the curse? It asked to be born through you? Amara's throat was dry. She wanted to deny it, to say it was only a dream, but the memory was too vivid. The smell of the rainless wind, the way the being's voice had coiled around her name. She nodded once. Gasps broke the tense air. One of the elders crossed himself with the sign of protection. Another muttered about evil wearing the face of innocence. You see. Elder Bwana slammed his hand against the floor mat. The curse is not content to haunt us. It wants to take flesh again. If we allow her to stay, we are welcoming our destruction. The words rippled through the crowd outside. From beyond the hut walls, voices rose, angry, frightened, calling for her to be cast out. Someone shouted, "Send her to the wilderness." Another yelled, "Banish her before the rains turn to blood." Masika leaned forward, her eyes searching Amara's face as if hoping to find some trace of regret that would make this easier. Do you understand, child? If what you say is true, then you are no longer just marked by the curse. You have joined with it. Amara swallowed hard, her pulse loud in her ears. I did not ask for this, she said quietly. It came to me. It begged me. It was not like the stories you tell. It was. But her voice was drowned by the uproar outside. The crowd had begun to chant, the rhythm building. Exile her. Exile her. Exile her. The decision came swiftly. The elders did not deliberate for long. They had waited years for a reason to rid themselves of her, and now it had arrived gift-wrapped in fear. By nightfall she would be gone, driven beyond the stone boundary markers into the wild lands, where no one ventured except the desperate and the doomed. When she stepped out of the hut, the villagers' eyes gleamed with a mixture of relief and cruelty. A few threw stones, not large enough to kill but enough to sting. An old woman she had once helped gather water turned her face away. Even the children she sometimes gave bread to now hid behind their mothers, peeking at her as though she were a venomous snake. Amara walked slowly back to her small hut to gather the few possessions she could carry. Inside, the air felt already empty, as if her life here had been erased in the moment the elders spoke. She touched the carved wooden bowl her mother had left her, the one thing she would take, and slipped it into her bundle. Outside the chanting had not stopped. It rose with the setting sun, growing louder as if the darkness itself fed their hatred. And beneath the noise, Amara could feel it, that same presence from the night before, lingering at the edge of her thoughts. "They will send you away," the voice murmured. But where they send you I will follow. Her hands trembled, not with fear of the wilderness, but with the knowledge that whatever lay ahead, she would not face it alone, whether she wanted the company or not. Amara sat on the floor of her hut, knees drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them as though she could physically hold herself together. The oil lamp beside her sputtered, throwing long restless shadows across the walls. In the flicker of light, she could still see the outline of the being from the night before, its strange, sorrowful eyes, its trembling voice as it begged her for a chance at rebirth. Let me be born again, as your child. Only then will I be free. Those words had sunk deep, lodging themselves in her mind like thorns. She hadn't slept since. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw its face. Not monstrous. Not entirely human. Something caught between worlds, carrying a grief that felt older than the village itself. Outside, the night buzzed with the sounds of crickets and the distant croak of frogs in the marsh, yet every so often she thought she heard murmurs, villagers speaking about her in hushed tones. They had already heard fragments of her confession. Someone must have been listening when she spoke to Elder Bwana. Now, the rumor had become its own creature, running faster than the wind. She speaks to demons. It wants to be born through her. We will all suffer if she stays. Amara pressed her forehead to her knees, breathing deeply. Fear coiled inside her chest, hot and suffocating. The request was not something she could dismiss easily. If she refused, what would happen to the being? Would it wander in endless suffering, tied to her shadow forever? And if she accepted, what would be born? The memory of her mother's voice floated back to her, soft, warm, from long before illness took her away. Kindness is not about what is safe, Amara. It is about what is right. Her mother had been one of the few who didn't treat her like a curse. She had believed that storms, eclipses, and strange omens did not define a person. But her mother wasn't here anymore. Amara lifted her head and stared at the small clay pot of water in the corner. Its surface reflected her face, eyes rimmed red, hair tangled from restless tossing. She barely recognized herself. Somewhere in the reflection, she imagined she saw another face just behind hers. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Why me? She whispered into the still air. There was no answer, only the faint sway of the grass outside. She rose to her feet and began pacing. Her thoughts pulled in two directions. One was pure fear, fear of the unknown, fear of the villagers, fear of herself. The other was compassion, an ache in her chest when she remembered the being's voice, the weight of its longing. She imagined what it might be like to hold a child, not just any child but one carrying an ancient soul yearning for release. Would the child be normal? Or would it be born under storms and eclipses again, cursed to the same fate she had endured? The door creaked open slightly with the night wind, and Amara stepped outside. The moon was high, bathing the earth in a pale glow. The air smelled faintly of rain though the skies were clear. She walked toward the lone baobab tree near the edge of the village. It had stood there for generations, its roots deep, its bark scarred by the years. She placed a hand against its rough trunk, grounding herself. If I do this, she thought, I will be sealing my fate. I will be the mother of something the village fears before it even draws breath. Her mind painted the scenes in advance. Women crossing the road to avoid her, children pointing, men spitting at her feet. She had lived her whole life on the edge of the village, unwanted. This choice could push her beyond the edge entirely. But there was something else. A quieter thought. What if this is not a curse at all? What if it is a gift disguised as one? Asterisk. The being had not threatened her. It had not tried to harm her. It had simply asked, pleaded, for release. She thought of how lonely it must have been, tethered to her life, carrying centuries of grief with no end in sight. Wasn't that a prison too? She pressed her forehead against the tree, closing her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw the being again. This time it didn't speak. It only looked at her, and in its gaze she felt an ache so deep it was almost unbearable. Her chest tightened. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear now but from something closer to understanding. When she opened her eyes, the night seemed different. The wind was softer, the stars sharper. She knew her answer, though it terrified her. She would accept. Not because it was safe or because she was sure of the outcome, but because she could not turn her back on something, or someone, who had only ever asked for kindness. She had lived her whole life being denied compassion. She would not do the same to another, even if that other came from a place beyond mortal understanding. Amara straightened, her decision like a stone settling at the bottom of a restless river. There would be consequences. The village might exile her or worse. But she would face them. The moonlight caught in her eyes as she whispered into the night, asterisk, I will not abandon you. Asterisk. Somewhere, faint and distant, she thought she heard a sigh of relief carried on the wind, soft, almost human, almost grateful. She turned and walked back toward her hut, her steps slow but steady. The choice was made. The path ahead was shadowed and uncertain, but it was hers to walk. And she would walk it. The night was thick with stillness, the kind that seemed to press against the skin, heavy and expectant. Amara stood at the edge of the village, her bare feet sinking into the damp earth as the moon struggled to break through shreds of restless clouds. She could still hear the angry voices from earlier that day, accusations, curses spat in her direction, and the final command, leave before you bring ruin to us all. But she hadn't left. Something in her bones told her she couldn't, not yet. The being, the so-called curse, had spoken to her again in whispers only she could hear. Its voice was neither entirely human nor entirely otherworldly, soft, mournful, and threaded with something desperate. Tonight, it had said. Tonight I will show you the truth. The wind shifted, carrying with it a scent unlike anything in the village. Wild jasmine mixed with something metallic like rain on stone. Amara turned toward the sound of rustling leaves, though no breeze seemed to stir them. From the darkness between two baobab trees, the figure emerged. It was taller than before, its shape wavering as though caught between worlds. Shadows clung to it, but beneath the shifting veil, Amara caught glimpses of something luminous, skin like polished bronze, eyes that glowed faintly gold. No longer the wretched, twisted thing she'd first seen, the curse now stood almost human, almost beautiful. Why are you changing? Amara whispered, her voice trembling not with fear but awe. The being stepped closer, and the shadows slipped from its form like water. Because you listened, it said. Because you did not turn away. Amara's heart pounded. What are you? I was never a curse, it replied, its voice resonating with a strange music. Long ago I was one of your own, a guardian spirit bound to this land. I kept the rains steady, the soil fertile, the sickness away. But the greed of your ancestors, they sought to own what could never belong to them. They bound me, twisted me, and every generation since has fed the story of my hatred. The words sank into Amara like stones dropped into deep water. The strange deaths, the withering crops, they weren't her doing at all. The spirit had been lashing out in confusion, trapped in the shape they had forced upon it. Then why me? She asked. The spirit's golden eyes softened. Because you were born on the night the chains began to weaken. The storms, the eclipse, they were my cry for release. You are the first to carry my voice without fear. Amara swallowed, her throat dry. And the child you asked me to bear? That, the spirit said, is the final bond. If you accept, I will be reborn, not as a curse, not as a shadow, but as life itself. I will no longer haunt your people. Instead, I will heal what has been broken. The choice she had wrestled with for days suddenly carried a new weight. It was not just about compassion for a trapped being, it was about rewriting the fate of her people. Yet she thought of their faces, twisted with hatred, ready to cast her out. Would they ever believe? Or would they see this as proof of their worst fears? As if sensing her doubt, the spirit extended a hand, warm, solid now, no longer made of shifting darkness. Let me show them. The ground beneath them began to tremble. From the earth, shoots of green burst forth, climbing and twisting into vines heavy with fruit. The air filled with the scent of rain, and Amara could hear the distant roar of water rushing where the river had long been dry. The moon finally broke free from the clouds, bathing them in silver light. The spirit's form shifted fully now, no shadows, no distortion. It was a man and yet more than a man, his presence commanding yet gentle, like the earth itself had taken human shape. Around them, the land seemed to breathe again. From the village, people emerged, drawn by the sudden life returning to their parched fields. They stopped in their tracks when they saw Amara standing beside the figure. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, fear, confusion, awe. One of the elders stepped forward, his eyes wide. "What have you done?" "I have given back what was stolen," the spirit said, his voice carrying over the gathering. "It was not she who cursed you, it was your own doing, passed down through generations of lies. But she listened when no one else would. Through her I am free." The villagers looked from him to Amara, their expressions shifting as the truth began to take root. The crops were already greener, the air cooler, the oppressive weight of drought lifting. For the first time in her life, no one looked at her with pure hatred. The spirit turned to her. "You have made your choice, Amara. Whether you accept me as part of your blood or simply as your ally, know this, I will protect you and I will protect this land." Amara's chest tightened, tears welling in her eyes. For so long she had carried the burden of being the cursed one, and now the truth stood before everyone. She reached out, placing her hand in his. "Then we begin again." And in that moment the last remnants of the curse dissolved into the night, leaving only the promise of renewal. The village would never be the same, nor would she.